Hello, welcome to today's class in Literature in English. Now, today we are going to comprehensively carry out an analysis of figurative language in terms of their types and their usages in context. Now, we had said clearly in the introductory class that the beauty of literature is embedded in the concept of its creativity. Now, what this simply explains is that the beauty of literature is conveyed in the meaning of which is beneath the lines. Today, we are going to be looking at the several languages of which literary expressions and meanings are conveyed. That is what we call figurative expressions. You can also call it figures of speech. The first figure of speech I will want you to know is simile. Simile is that figure of speech that directly compares two opposite things using like or as the basis for comparison. Now, when we talk about this figure of speech, there must be the presence of two opposite concepts. The first will be maybe a human, and the other will be abstract or a non-human or inanimate, as the case may be. And the comparison of the behavior or the feature of either of these concepts will be done using like or as to do the comparisons. Now, in the first example, Esther talks like a parrot, and in the second, Jerry behaves as a lion. You will agree with me that there are two opposite concepts in the two explanations. The first is Esther and the second is parrot. Be a human being and an animal. And the second is also a comparison between a human being and an animal. But the behavior or the similarities of which these concepts share is done using like or as for its comparison. Esther talks like a parrot. Jerry behaves as a lion. Anytime like or as is used to compare the behavior of two opposite entities or concepts, then the figurative language that has been employed in that statement is known as simile. The next figurative expression is metaphor. Metaphor could be said to be in some way a direct opposite of simile, because this figurative language compares two opposite things just like simile, but its comparison is done without the use of like on as. Therefore, in metaphorical expressions, there will always be the presence of two opposite concepts or entities as simile. But the major distinction between these two figurative expressions is that metaphor does not use like or as for its comparison. Jesus is the rock of ages. Comfort is a parrot. In those statements, you will also see the presence of two opposite concepts, but the comparison is done directly without the use of like or as. You can say that Jesus Christ is like the rock of ages, simile. Jesus is the rock of ages, metaphor. Comfort is like a parrot, simile. Comfort is a parrot, metaphorical. When you say someone is an animal, then that is metaphorical, because the comparison of these two opposite things are done without the use of like or as. The next figurative expression is personification. Personification is a concept that is coined from the root word person, which means a human being. Personification, therefore, is the transfer of human attributes to non-humans or inanimate, thereby personifying the inanimate objects. When we say that an object has been personified, it simply means that that object has been made to look like a human being that is carrying out an action of which human beings were supposed to do. In basic grammar, we would know that sentences may likely have subjects and, of course, verbs. But in personifications, you will notice clearly that the subject, which is supposed to be a human or a non-human in some contexts, will be performing what human beings were ideally supposed to do, then you say that the concept has been personified, meaning that it has been made to look like a person. Death lays its icy hands on kings. In that statement, it appears as though death has hands of which it can likely lay on kings. Therefore, death has been personified. Death has been made to look as though it is a human being performing the action of laying his or her hands on kings. In the second illustration, death took my precious father away. Again, death has been personified to look like a human being by taking someone away, which is ideally supposed to be actions carried out by animates. If I add some illustrations by saying the time is running very fast, in that case, you will agree with me that time has been personified to look as if it is a human being that is actually carrying out the race of running. So personification transfers the actions of non-humans or non-animates to inanimates or sometimes non-living things in general. That is what we mean by personification. If you look at the first few lines of a poem titled To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell, he says in the concluding part, "But at my back I see time's winged chariot hurrying near." In that statement, he seems to personify time as though it is a chariot and of which is indeed running. In one of the lines in a poem titled The Sun Rising by John Donne, John Donne was clearly chastising the sun, and he was in so many lines of that poem personifying the sun. He said the sun smites children when they come back from school. It makes the sun look like a human being who can actually smite or beat people. And in some other line, he said that the sun is so unruly and that he peers through curtains and calls at people. Call at simply means to visit, personifying the sun as though it is a human being that can actually perform the action of visiting. So when something is personified, it is clear that that thing is not a person, but is made to look as though it is performing the actions of persons. That is the beauty of creativity in literature. The next literary and figurative expression is apostrophe. This term refers to a situation where a person makes an address to an abstract or non-living entity as though they were humans. This statement may sharply be confused for personification. Now, we had said that personification transfers human attributes to non-humans. But in an apostrophe, it is a statement or a remark that is made to non-humans as though those non-humans were indeed humans and could hear what the speaker was saying. In the first line of John Donne's poem titled The Sun Rising, he said, "Busy old fool, unruly son." Busy old fool, unruly son. Obviously, he was addressing the sun. The sun could not hear him. The sun, of course, is not a human being and may not, of course, will not have the capacity to hear. But John Donne, the poet speaker, was addressing the sun as though the sun could hear. That statement, which a poet or a person makes to an inanimate object as though the animate object was listening to him or her, is called an apostrophe. "Goodbye, proud wall, I know you not. You don't like me and I hate you too." That is the final words of a person who is dying. "Goodbye, proud wall, I know you don't like me and I hate you too." He is talking to the wall as though the wall is a human being directly there and listening. So the striking distinction between a personified statement and an apostrophe is that in personification, the human actions are transferred to non-humans. But in an apostrophe, a statement is made to a non-human as though that human had ears and could listen. The next figurative expression is hyperbole. This refers to the deliberate use of excessive notion or overstatement by a writer or speaker for the purpose of creating emphasis. Now, very brilliantly, when a statement contains a hyperbole, it simply means that the speaker consciously and deliberately exaggerates lexical items in order to achieve emphasis. Now, take note that the major aim of every statement that contains hyperbole is to achieve emphasis and importance to the statement. The jilted bride cried an ocean of tears. You will agree with me that it may likely be almost impossible for a human being to cry tears up to the level of an ocean. But the poet or the speaker of that remark had to exaggerate the statement in order to emphasize the extent of tears of which the jilted bride had cried. The main aim of this statement is to achieve emphasis. Her beauty can make men go crazy. It may likely also be impossible that the beauty of someone can cause in reality people to go mad. But in order to emphasize clearly the extent to which this woman is extremely beautiful, these statements can be embellished and garnished in literary terms in order to achieve emphasis. The girl is so promiscuous that every man in town had slept with her. Now, it is absolutely and nearly impossible that a girl can submit herself to be slept by every man in a town. But in order for the speaker to achieve the emphasis, the importance to the extent of her promiscuity, that person had to exaggerate the meaning in order to achieve emphasis. I am so hungry that I can even consume a mountain yard of cocoyam. That is to emphasize the extent of my hunger. Perhaps if I say I am hungry, you may take it for likely or for granted. But hyperboles will always blow up the real meaning in large extent in order to achieve emphasis. In the lines in a poem titled To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell, he said to his coy mistress that if he had enough wool and time, he will use 200 years to adore each part of his breast, or her breast, I beg your pardon. And he will use an age, perhaps a generation, that's 100 years, to gaze at her forehead. It is not possible that a human being can use 100 years to consistently gaze at a lover's forehead. But in order for him to achieve emphasis of love and affection, these exaggerations had to be made in order to achieve emphasis. 200 years to adore each part of a breast, and another 30,000 for the rest. I refer you to that poem titled To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. Hyperbole explodes, if I must use that term, lexical items in order to achieve emphasis. Now, the next figure of speech is euphemism. Euphemism is that expression that conveys unpleasant and blunt expression in a mild and pleasant way. So when we say that a statement is euphemistic, we are simply saying clearly that the real meaning of the statement has been hidden behind the mild words of expression, so that blunt and perhaps vulgar expressions are conveyed in simple and mild words. The young man passed away. Now, you will agree with me that death has been euphemized in that statement in the words pass away. It may be vulgar to say that the young man died. Mary has been deflowered. Being deflowered has been euphemized to mean, of course, that the girl has been disvirgined. So euphemism, therefore, usually will hide the vulgar expressions and meanings of statements in mild statements or even expressions. We have seen so many examples of euphemisms in the Holy Bible, especially when it was said that Abraham knew his wife and she conceived. Having knowledge of a woman simply is a mild way of saying some raw forms of carnal relationship. You can also see an instance where we saw, and then the Holy Spirit came on Mary. We can see clearly when the Virgin was visited by Gabriel, Angel Gabriel, And then she said that she knows no man. When she said that she knew no man, that doesn't mean that she may not have been able to identify a man. But having knowledge of a man perhaps means having sexual intercourse. But these statements have been clothed in mild expressions. Anytime vulgar expressions, unpleasant statements, or even heartbreaking remarks are being clothed in mild and simple sentences, then you can say that the statement is euphemistic. The next figure of speech is onomatopoeia. An onomatopoeia is the deployment of words in a way that such words suggest or echo their meaning or sense of use. These words suggest their meanings from their sound. So an onomatopoeic expression will always carry out sound expressions as a result of the objects that has been used. I advise you to zip your trousers. Zip there, of course, is onomatopoeic because the object produces that same sound. The boom of a gun, the hoot of the cricket. You can say that the woods creaked, and then you can talk about bangs, the booms of the gun, the meow of the cat, the roarings of the lions, the patterings of rainfall on the lowering eaves. All these are sounds that are associated with the objects, and then you can say that an onomatopoeia has been employed. The next figurative language is oxymoron. An oxymoron is the figure of speech that combines contradictory words to reveal a truth. Now, it is very important to know that oxymorons will always place two unlikely and contradictory words, take note, words or lexical items side by side in order to achieve emphasis. If you say children usually have stupid sense, you will agree with me that stupid and sense are contradictory to each other, but has been used to achieve some sense of beauty. Love is a necessary evil. That becomes an oxymoron, because anything that is evil may not be necessary, and anything that is necessary shouldn't be evil. But there is some sense of beauty in these expressions. Knowing you has been a sweet sorrow. Sweet and sorrow, contradictory statements used to achieve emphasis. Going through school is usually a sweet bitter experience. Sweet bitter experience. Sweet and bitter. All of these are usually talking about oxymoron. You hear things like big children. I will quote that instance in one of the poems we are going to be studying. Complaining truths of big children. That's an oxymoron. Big and children, contradictory to each other. Now, do not forget that an oxymoron will be alive if and only if the expressions are opposite to each other. The words used are contradictory. When we talk about contradiction, we are talking about mutually exclusive events. Two things that may likely not occur at the same time. But in literature, it can be used to achieve high-level beauty and creativity. The next figurative language is irony. When you say that a statement is ironical, we are simply saying that that statement or speech conveys the opposite of the intended meaning of the writer or speaker. Sometimes we say things in the opposite direction, and whenever we do that, we are simply making an ironical statement. Judas Iscariot was the most faithful disciple of Jesus Christ. That statement simply conveys, with all standards, the opposite of the intended meaning, and that statement is ironical. During our session on literary terms, we had talked about irony of situation, and that concept is coined from this figurative language, which means a situation in drama where characters relate with one another without knowing the true identity of themselves, of which in so many cases the audience will always be aware. So ironies will always convey the opposite, the contradictory, the other part of the intended meaning. Now, it is necessary to understand that the deployment of ironical statements are conscious. The writer consciously does this in order to create this beauty in literary expressions. The next figure of speech is paradox. Paradox is the placement of two contradictory ideas which turns out to make sense or be true. However, paradox places contradictory ideas unlike oxymoron. Now, when a statement contains an oxymoron, you will notice that the words that are used are contradictory. But in paradox, what we may likely see is ideas and not necessarily words. Let the dead bury their dead. For slaves, life was death, and death was life. It is very important to note that a paradoxical statement initially always appears as though it is not meaningful, but a close examination of the statement will reveal the truthness in its content. When the statement, let the dead bury their dead, you may initially think, how can dead people bury dead people? But it means that when people around us die, we should bury them, because one day we will also die and expect some living beings to carry out our interments. For slaves, life was death and death was life. How is it possible for life to be death and death to be life? But a close examination will reveal that the torture of which slaves go through was synonymous to even death. It talks about the torture, the pains of which slaves go through. That, of course, will not be able to say that they are living. These things are contradictory. If I make a statement that says, the land of the living dead is alive, or someone is a dead man walking, these are contradictory expressions. A dead man walking, of course, is paradoxical. But if you say living dead, that becomes an oxymoron, because in oxymorons we are dealing with words, lexical items. In paradox, we are dealing with ideas generally. Now, having considered these figures of speech, I want you to watch out for our next video, as we are going to be completing this topic as regards figurative language. Thank you for watching.